Welcome to Cartoonist Kayfabe Show and Tell. I'm Jim Rugg.
My name's Ep.4.
I'm Tom Scholey.
Special guest in the house.
This week we're going to talk a little bit about picture books and show off a few picture books. I started looking at picture books around 5 or 6 years ago for a class I was teaching at SVA that was multidisciplinary, so I needed to kind of like look at different visual storytelling mediums and try to find some common language there. Once I started looking at picture books, I kind of fell in love, and I think there's a lot in picture books that we can use as cartoonists. So we're going to show off some books that I like. We're going to show off some books that are drawn or written by cartoonists, people who we mostly know because of their comics work, and as well as some great designers and just some standout books from my collection and from the local library.
Top-notch work, amazing production values on very old books. It really lets you know kind of like where comics' place was in the culture when you compare a 1950s comic with a 1950s picture book.
Absolutely. For a long time, I think picture books outpaced comics in terms of design and production. And I think comics are catching up, but that is what we're going to see, and that's part of what makes them so inspirational to me now.
Yeah, and it's really important to look at influences outside of comics when you're making comics. And so this is a form that is just adjacent to comics. And you might even be able to make the argument that it actually is comics, even if it's not necessarily viewed that way. So
we'll see that in a few of the examples that we look at. And as you say, Tom, everybody's so quick to talk about film influences, but I rarely hear anybody say picture books.
Okay, so let's put these under the microscope.
So we'll start with one of my favorites here, the monster at the end of this book, featuring Grover. And the conceit of this book is in the title. So as you start reading this book and turning the pages, Grover is pleading with you to stop because there's a monster at the end of the book. One of the things that stood out to me whenever I came back to this book, this was a favorite of mine as a child, I started reading these again, 30 years after the fact, is the lettering. Very distinct, very graphic, everything's just tied together. Basically good design.
Every cartoonist should have their own serifed lettering style, a la like a Will Eisner, Dan Clowes, Robert Crumb. And we'll see some sound effects a little bit later. It's very reminiscent of like a Gahan Wilson or something.
Very animated. It's very playful. What I would think is perfect for a kid's book.
There's that Gahan Wilson-ish kind of like crosshatch on a thing. And I think one of the things that'll be very noteworthy as we check out all these books really is the production values. Like comics, especially back in these old days, such a dirt medium that the production values were so chintzy. And there's like just a lot more labor and TLC built into the picture books.
Yeah, you can see Neil Adams has talked about how just having these like color overlays is something that was done in most production art, commercial art, except comics. They were decades behind coming to that.
And the story, it follows the hero's journey. This monster that he's ready to do battle with or is in fear of, by the end of the book, he finds out that the monster is him.
Right. Yeah, I showed this book to, I read it to my nephew whenever he was young, and he was basically hysterical as the stakes are escalating throughout the book. So that's kind of my memory of it as well, really, really ramping up the anxiety in children. Very effective, though, I think, for a picture book. This is another favorite of mine. It's called No, and the conceit here is this is a rambunctious dog that's constantly doing things it shouldn't, and as a result, it's being told no to the point that it thinks its name is No. So it's getting into lots of trouble and being reprimanded constantly.
I like the choice of not filling in white on the eyes.
Yeah, it's one of the things that we're going to come back to over and over with these is the inventive visuals. It's something that I think comics lagged behind for a long time, and now you're seeing people do everything in comics visually and use all kinds of media, but that was something picture books did for really almost from the beginning.
Transparent word balloon.
Nice lettering.
Yeah, the lettering's really a highlight of I'd say, the whole genre of picture books.
Yeah, I think graphically there's a lot that cartoonists can take from picture books, but it's not something I hear cartoonists talk about that often. This is M. Sasek, a very famous picture book author that did a series of these books called This Is, usually a place, often a city, like This Is Paris, This Is Tokyo. He also did things like This Is a Journey to the Moon, where it was showing rockets in development. And one thing I mentioned in picture books is there's so many storytelling elements that are like comics. Here we have an example that's essentially, you'd recognize as a 9-panel grid in a comic book. Most of his pages, you'll see multiple images. Of course, the examples I show aren't that way. Great city at night. But several images using spreads, reading in little pieces. It's very reminiscent of comics and graphic novels, even though no one would look at this and call it a comic. Definitely storytelling that we would see in comics. Because it's such a big industry, it also attracts a lot of different visual artists, including legendary graphic designers like Paul Rand, in partnership with his wife Anne, who wrote this book.
The great Paul Rand, you know his work. Basically every television logo you've ever seen, the IBM logo, probably UPS. His work's been all over the place. One of my favorite Paul Rand stories is he created when Steve Jobs left Apple, he created Next Computers, and the way, like, Paul Rand was such a big willy and had such a amazing body of work that the way he worked at that time, you give him $250,000, you ask no questions, he will deliver you your logo, and it is what it is, man. You have to have that leap of faith.
Yeah, so you see him doing like torn paper and things. Very different than what we saw in any comics that would have been in this time period. This is probably the early 60s, I'm guessing, 1956. So quite a departure from what you're seeing in comic books at the time. A contemporary designer of Paul Rand's, the great Saul Bass. This is his contribution to picture books.
Yeah, Saul Bass is somebody Steranko cites as an influence.
Yeah, famous for doing a lot of motion graphics, things like title sequences in movies and movie posters. Did a lot of work with Hollywood and specifically Alfred Hitchcock. And you can certainly see pretty interesting compositional choice.
Yeah, every page turn, he totally changes his approach to like laying out space, where your eye goes. Your eye keeps moving in all these interesting ways.
Attention to typography.
Yeah, this is definitely that era where like typography as an art form, you know, where you'd go to a museum and see like just like a bunch of words displayed as an art piece.
Yeah, so great use of color, shape. And of course, our entry is through comics, so there's lots of cartoonists that have done work in picture books. This is an example of Richard McGuire, famous in comics probably for doing the short comic Here that appeared in Raw magazine. It's been expanded since then to a full-length graphic novel, but he's also done several picture books. And like our previous examples, this is somebody who is a graphic artist experimenting with layout, experimenting with typography, production values.
Yeah, that's something you don't see much in comics is punch-outs.
Well, there was that one issue of the Protectors or the Ferret or whatever. Maybe they were inspired by a Richard McGuire. Something tells me they were not.
Yeah, lots of pushing the production envelope. Something you do see occasionally in books like Raw.
This is like Gary Panter type
Yes, for sure.
shit right
The
there.
blue meanies from Yellow Submarine.
I think some of these books he even does upside down lettering, you know, things that would require you to turn the books around as you're reading. So very inventive, very playful.
So this is one, the Snowman, that's worth talking about. Scott McCloud mentions this in Understanding Comics as like an example of how, you know, children's books in a lot of cases are basically comics, and but they at that point in time didn't get the respect of comics. And this was the example he cited, but look at this. And also adhering to his definition of comics, words aren't a requirement. There are no words in this. But this is, you know, pretty close to how I approach comics now. These compositions where it's, you know, a lot of small panels on a page and art that's partially linear, partially cartooning, but doesn't have a hard line is you know, told in tones. And it's got as much story as you'd have in a graphic novel. It you know, you go through the whole cycle of birth and death with this snowman.
Traumatic content for a kid. Ed, you mentioned comics being a dirt medium for so much of its history. This is probably a good example, because clearly no one would call this not comics except for the person producing it if they have a choice, because at the time it would have been, I'm sure, a much better payout, reach a wider audience, you know, get book placement in bookstores and libraries, all because it's not a comic, it's a picture book.
Yes, Scott McCloud calling this a comic was a bold statement in, you know, 1987. Not now. Not a bold statement now.
This was one of the first picture books that I got hold of via Copacetic Comics and a recommendation from its proprietor, Bill Boychel. This is Mark Allen Stamety. I'm probably butchering his name, but he did comics for Village Voice, Washington Post, Boston Globe, New Yorker, and you can see clearly he has the cartoonist, cartoonist style in his blood. You can even see, like, not exactly word balloons, but these trails of words running around, almost like early Winsor McKay or something, where the word balloons didn't really have a standard shape yet.
Yeah, you would see this in old tapestries, in fact.
It also calls to mind things like Bill Elder's Chicken Fat, where it's just completely covered in marks, hidden gags. It would reward a kid or anybody that would just kind of feast on these visuals and continue looking at them.
Yeah, and the marks create shades of gray.
Absolutely. I mean, this spread here is like a Goodman Beaver Bill Elder spread.
Yeah, and the line work totally in line with any number of cartoonists. He's clearly using pen and ink.
All this amazing textures blows my mind.
And this is one of the Sweet Pickles series of books by Richard Hefter. And these were advertised on television. So that's how widespread they were. And just I bring this one up particularly just to sort of note the similarity to like Paper Rad, this sort of overstimulation of the eyes, bright colors, really simple shapes, very memorable characters. Each character looking very, very different than the other.
Yeah, Paper Rat, I think, is a really good comparison for something like this.
Poppy colors and all that.
Yeah. That calls to mind Matt Fury. This is a book that he did through McSweeney's, and it is a wordless picture book. So Matt Fury, a cartoonist known for Boys Club and made famous for being the creator of Pepe the Frog.
The creator and killer of Pepe the Frog.
I find this one really interesting. First of all, I had not encountered a wordless picture book before this. Since then, I have found several, and it's a very interesting genre unto itself. But in terms of storytelling, there's a very clear left-to-right progression, and he uses basically 3 variations. One is the 2-page spread in this horizontal landscape format. It's just beautiful. The other is breaking that into 4 panels, or breaking it into 2 panels, which he does in several places. So very easy to read and to make sense of. But very fun, and it's basically just this character going on a night bike ride, and some cases looking for his friends to bike with, or running into problems and trying to avoid too much trouble. So pretty straightforward. I don't know how you read these to children, but very fun to look at. This is Renee French. I don't know what she would be most well known for in comics. She's done several graphic novels like The Ticking. She did a couple of books featuring a character, Bornstat, that I like. It's kind of monster character.
She's been all over the place, very rigorous cartooning. She started off doing the stipple thing, but she would have, all of the anthology series that mattered, she would have strips in there. But her work is so rigorous, so laborious that you're not going to get a 300-page, magnum opus from her. But
yeah, kind of a darker set of imagery, a little bit horrific, a little bit scary. She also has built up a following through gallery shows and stuff because of that rigorous art style and that, bits of horror, bits of cuteness.
And she works extremely small, so a lot of these tones and things are just like sort of natural smudging, maybe not in this particular work, but natural smudging that happens when you're working at like this really small scale.
Yeah, it does a lot with graphite, which was, again, now everybody does everything in comics, but she was one of the people that was kind of a forerunner of that in comics, before it was easy to reproduce or before people realized you could reproduce all those tones. So she was kind of at the forefront of that. A cartoonist that I think is somewhat similar in terms of doing adult content in a lot of their comics is Dave Cooper. In this case, he's working under a pseudonym, I guess, to avoid any potential trouble of somebody Googling, his picture book work and finding some of his more adult painting or comics work. But this is a great one because he's very good as a colorist in comics as well, and also lettering.
Yes.
And so you get to see all of his skills in this. If you're a Dave Cooper fan, you would love this. So, people that only know him from comics or from his painting work, this would be something to seek out.
It's really hard to control these kind of brown tones and get them to like play off of each other and work, and not just become a mess. But there, it's like very, very vivid. Your eye follows really well. Really good choices.
Yeah, to me, this is some of my favorite Dave Cooper work. It's the cartoony stuff that I like. You know, he works in a variety of styles, but this is some of the stuff I find most attractive. And probably that production is part of it, Tom. You know, the ability to reproduce these colors and muted colors, somewhat limited. Tom Gauld's another cartoonist with that almost genius-like eye for detail and graphic design. This was done by Buenaventura Press, so it's kind of outside of the typical range of a picture book, but clearly I think you would call this a picture book. It's, 20 pages on this heavy stock, one image per page, set against type, and it's in the same exact location. So this is the story of people at war building an ultimate weapon for this war. It takes a long time to construct this robot for war. By that point, the war is resolved, and this robot never works anyway. So then we see the whole life cycle of this from concept to basically turning into ruins.
So beautiful.
Yeah. This is by Sean Tan. He did a graphic novel. The first I'd heard of Sean Tan, and I think he's a Xeric winner. Mm-hmm. The first I heard of Sean Tan was a book called The Arrival that was mostly a wordless graphic novel. He's gone on to win an Academy Award for a short film that he basically did everything for. Another guy that's just, super visually accomplished artist. And this is one of the examples of his attempts at a picture book. And I kind of love the collage. Again, another example that we haven't seen yet, another approach to graphic design, putting it together, working with different media all in one place. It's becoming more commonplace that comics can be created this way, but this is pretty atypical for comics even today.
As you're paging through this, I'm trying to see, is each one of those collages just the same collage over as a time saver? No. He's doing a totally unique collage every page.
Yeah, it's very inventive visually from page to page. Layouts change quite a bit. The way text is applied is different from page to page. As you say, Tom, the collages vary. So, pretty great to look at. A lot of media. And of course, there are big names that venture into children's books and picture books. Neil Gaiman and Dave McKean. Any fans of Sandman might be interested in tracking down some of their work together. Again, multimedia. This was interesting. I pulled this from my local library, and it was not in the children's section. It was in juvenile literature, and I was talking to the librarian about it, and she kind of flipped through and was like, yeah, we can't really. It's a little intense for children.
I wonder where they would put Coraline.
Yeah, it's probably in the young adult. But very close to comics once again. Like that's the thing that I came away from once I started looking at picture books was like, if it's not already something that would be identified as comics, it's stuff you could steal and put into your comics.
This reminds me of Kevin O'Neill, what they would say about Kevin O'Neill, where it's like, there's something about the style that's just that's we got to put the stamp on, and it's the style rather than any of the subject matter in there. There's something about the style that's a little creepy.
Gaiman's done a lot of picture books, so here's another one. This one with Charles Vess, obviously a longtime cartoonist. This one with Adam Rex, who I think is primarily a children's book illustrator, and this is a series, so I think it's had quite a bit of success. But you see the lessons, from comics to this, it's not far removed. 2-page splashes, smaller panels, pretty easy to make that jump. And a twist at the end, Jane the Fox and Me. This is one of my favorite graphic novels ever. It's by Fanny Britt and Isabelle Arsenault, two French-Canadian creators, primarily known for their work as picture book creators. They've done several of those together, but this is just a straightforward graphic novel. It's their first one. It's a coming-of-age story about this girl in middle school and her struggles to fit in. Beautiful use of color. I think this is a callback to some of the picture books we've been looking at, is that visual inventiveness. Something we're seeing more and more in comics, but has not always been the case. And then one of my favorite parts is her little brothers are actually depicted as ninjas because, they're kind of like monkeys that torture her at home. So, little twist at the end. Nice lettering. I'm not sure how this was lettered because I think it was originally produced in French. So I don't know if she was responsible for relettering that by hand or not, but it seems like whoever did it certainly took their care.
The publishers certainly want you to. speaking from experience. They want you to re-letter it yourself. Then here's the Berenstain Bears. I don't know what universe you guys are from. I'm actually from a third universe where it was called the Bernstein Bears. Before we moved into this universe of the Berenstain Bears. But this is interesting to me just to sort of see how like a series that goes on for decades evolves. Stylistically and story-wise, you can see that's very different than the cartooning that we see in the Berenstain Bears as we know.
I remember this image so vividly from childhood.
I've never seen any of this early stuff, but it reminds me of like whenever they keep all the comic strip, like the entire body of work of like comic strip reprints like exists, and you get to see like the first Garfield and the first Charlie Brown or whatever, and how they're like off model to what we recognize today.
Yeah, even towards the end of this volume, it sort of evolves into like a whole other side approach where it's sort of like a lithography, this very sort of painterly and tonal approach, and just trying to figure out like what the story is of this ongoing series. It starts where it's one son with no name. In this series, it's actually there's like they have like 6 or 7 kids, and the kids. Like even into the 2000s, the kids still don't have names yet. It's brother and sister bear, and their little baby gets a name, Honey Bear. It was a series that to this day is still going on, and it's survived the original creators Stan and Jan Berenstain. It's now their son Mike has taken over, but there was a transition period where it went from Stan and Jan, and then Stan died, and it was Jan and Mike doing them together, and then Mike eventually took over. So it's just interesting seeing that sort of legacy, like you would have in a comic strip, and because it's the same family, there is sort of a smoother transition.
And just to hit some more, I guess, popular picture books that are out there, man. Harold and the Purple Crayon, who hasn't read this when they were a kid? But a lot of people, certainly the Kayfabers who come to our channel by way of Wizard Magazine specifically, perhaps did not know that the great Crockett Johnson was also a newspaper cartoonist. Did a strip called Barnaby for a number of years. To be specific, Crockett Johnson did the strip from 1942 to 46. Harold and the Purple Crayon comes out in 1955, and what's sort of noteworthy here is the use of typography as opposed to standard hand lettering, which seemed to give these old works, like even EC Comics, an air of respectability. And in fact, Dorothy Parker was like a huge fan of this strip. And for typography nerds out there, if you were curious, the font is Italic Futura Medium.
Yeah, very modern look. Very popular with Wes Anderson as well.
And then, of course, the great Dr. Seuss, who we all know and love, had a comic strip in the old days that lasted all of 3 months called Haji, 1935. The first Horton book, which we could probably say is like the first like Dr. Seuss, came out in 1940, 5 years after this. So Kitchen Sink put out this great 2-volume set, the Comic Strip Century, that collects like a bunch of stuff, and the entire Haji is in here. And you can see it has all the tropes and earmarks of like the great Dr. Seuss, man. Very imaginative, amazing looking creatures. We'll see, like look at that right there. You know what I'm saying? But all 12 strips were published in here, and it obviously was built to continue, but Mr. Hearst said, "Nah, we're done. We're good."
And then this, I don't know if you guys had this when you were kids, but this, like, to me is my definition of a graphic novel is probably more expansive than maybe everybody else's. But to me, like one of the ingredients is a picture narrative that's lengthy. And here, I mean, this is the Bible, and to me, this was like the history of the world. It's like you hear about this thing, the Bible. It's got creation until not too far in the past, and it just it almost like gives the illusion that you can find out about anything that happened in history and page through it, because of course as a kid having this book, you're pre-literate. You're not able to read it, so you're just kind of finding your way through. And only in like sort of rediscovering this book, I saw like what an influence it had for me in particular. Just the sort of like the tonal approach to drawing. There's just something about it that's always appealed to me. And sort of so this is the centerpiece of this book is the picture of Satan. And like every kid I knew who was aware of this book, they were fascinated with this page and a little bit scared to look at it, and because it's like you get God's all interesting and all that, but Satan you're like particularly fascinated with as a kid because he's the evil. He's the guy who can like creep into your dreams to kill you or whatever, like Freddy Krueger. But here he is, and you can actually see a picture of like the embodiment of all evil. And this image stuck with me, and I think without this page, there's no Satan soldier. He's sort of flying around like Superman in here, like a superhero character. So this was like the highlight of this book.
Also, I can't imagine Hellboy without this image. The Hellboy feet and the horns.
The just the aesthetic of like all of this stuff. It's like the pulp magazine covers of the day. 1930s, late 20s, all that shit, man.
Yeah, and it features Norwegian Jesus.
This is like right out of a background in Scooby-Doo.
Yeah.
Yeah, some apprentice did some work on that one.
Yeah, I'd say this book popularized the blonde Jesus. The blonde Jesus who's like thoroughly debunked.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I chose this one because like one of my personal sort of interests and obsessions is coloring and the proper color in comics and recoloring and how bad color can destroy a book. And this is like a good example of a book being reprinted recently, recolored, and just totally destroyed. The one on the left is the original edition from the 70s. And if you page through it a little bit, you'll see it's like The Wizard of Oz. It starts out in black and white with these, really nice, illustrations with no color whatsoever, just black and white. And
this is fucking horrendous.
This isn't it awful? And
Hold on.
Okay, sure.
Where are we at?
But at a point, there's a transition where magic enters the story, and she makes a wish that like everything she touches turns into candy. And so that's when color is finally introduced. We start to see color, and it comes in
piece of
more
shit.
and more and more. And look how that's totally obliterated by this book, where there's hardly any white in it anywhere. There's
This
a color from
a
day
lot
one.
of different ways.
like a Judy Blume teen picture book.
That's a very tactful way to say it, Ed.
And like all that's obliterated. The sort of the entry of magic into the story by way of color, very very carefully chosen color.
And beyond that, I mean, there's retooling of the line work.
Yeah, the line work is just obliterated. Here, it doesn't exist anymore.
These motherfuckers, Starbright Books, man, you need to be ashamed of yourself.
So that was the main thing I want to talk about with this piece here, because we see it all the time in comics, where old comics get recolored, and it's never as good as the initial printing.
I cut promos on Jerry Conway on Twitter once, man, because people were highlighting the differences, the disparity in color between the original Masters of Kung Fu and these like du jour reprints, where he's poppy color, like all the stuff that we complain about, and he responded, you take what you can get, he says. And I just blew up, because to me, that's his fucking career. Like, it's total, like, giving in, baseline, like, no consideration, just like Harlan Ellison said, man, he hit his deadlines. And I was just like, fuck you, dude. Like, why does it doesn't have to be that way. It's that way because you don't give a fuck. God damn it, man. I need to get back to making comics. I don't know about you guys.
All right, that's good for picture books for now. Maybe we'll show and tell some more in the future.
Read more comics.